Russia has launched a new wave of drone barrage on Ukraine, and this time around, Russian strikes hit Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv. The drone attack on Kharkiv damaged a maternity hospital located in the center of the city. Patients rushed to take shelter as windows were shattered. Shards of glass fell on the beds.
It was very scary because I was so full of adrenaline that I probably forgot that I had stitches. Now I am slowly recovering from the shock.
One Russian Iskander missile destroyed a Ukrainian armed forces deployment area in Nikolaev. Video shared by the Russian Defense Ministry showed the Ukrainian camp being blown into pieces due to the strike. The ministry said Russian troops used high-precision, long-range weapons and drones to hit these spots. Russia said it intercepted 155 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles from late Thursday into Friday morning, most of which were over the Kursk region bordering Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry has also said that the Russian army repelled multiple attacks by the Ukrainian army in Kharkiv, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, destroying a large number of military equipment of the Ukrainian army. In fact, Ukraine said it intercepted 382 air targets. This is the second consecutive day that Ukraine was hit by large-scale airstrikes. As per reports, 8 locations in the country were hit by Russian airstrikes. In an interview to NBC, the U.S. president expressed his disappointment with the Russian president and said that he will make a major statement on Moscow on Monday. Trump's team will also identify arms from U.S. stockpiles to send to Ukraine under the presidential drawdown authority, with one saying that it could be worth around $300 million. The package could include defensive Patriot missiles and offensive medium-range rockets. The U.S. Secretary of State has said that most U.S. military aid to Ukraine continues on schedule and accused European countries of not sharing unused Patriot batteries with Ukraine. The UK Prime Minister, meanwhile, and the French President have announced plans for a coalition of the willing. Peacekeeping force is ready to go, but once a ceasefire is agreed between Russia and Ukraine. Going straight across now to our esteemed guest with us on the broadcast. Let me just, for the benefit of our viewers, ask you to elaborate for us the immediate implications of what we are seeing on the ground, especially with the intensification of the Russian aerial attacks on Ukraine over the last couple of days. What do you think is the strategy of Moscow at this point?
Well, thanks very much, Molly, for having me back on your program. I think the general assumption in Washington, D.C. was that it would be possible to achieve some kind of an agreement with Russia in which all sides basically got to save face, the West, Ukraine, and Russia simultaneously. But nonetheless, such an agreement would require, in effect, Russia to acknowledge that Ukraine is going to be a heavily hostile state on its border and heavily armed as well. And Russia currently on the ground believes that it is winning this war, it is gaining territory, it is keeping up the pressure on Ukraine, and it thinks it has the opportunity here to achieve more of its aims, to turn Ukraine de facto into a genuinely neutral country with stricter limits on the size of its military. So that's the calculation in Moscow right now.
Let's also talk about what the role of the United States can be and should be at this point, according to you.
Yes, I think it's unfortunate that the Trump administration has been focusing its efforts so much on trying to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine, because that really reveals the extent to which President Trump is not particularly interested in the complex details of what kind of a negotiation would actually be necessary here. Because the war between Russia and Ukraine is not just a war between those two countries, it's actually a nested conflict within a broader set of long-standing, decades-long disputes over the European security order and what shape that security order should take, right? Who gets to make the rules, who gets to enforce those rules, etc. And that's what Russia here is trying to do. It's trying to shape its future role vis-a-vis that security order. And that requires talking about a whole bunch of issues, including Ukraine, but not just related to Ukraine. It also involves questions concerning the future economic shape of the continental order, also questions about arms control and strategic stability, and much, much more. And so doing that is going to require multiple different negotiation tracks with different constellations of actors all operating at the same time. And it's very difficult to achieve an agreement on that front, especially when you've got different sets of interests, between Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the United States.
Right. Also, the role of the EU here. In the latest, the French president, for example, stressing on the need to pressurize Vladimir Putin for a ceasefire. But at the same time, there's also that sense of pessimism that comes with it, because there's been a lot of talk about that happening, but no forward movement, really.
Indeed, and as I've said, I think it's a mistake on the part of not just the Trump administration, but also Ukraine and Europe to be backing just a ceasefire, because what Russia is interested in here is not just a ceasefire, but a broader political settlement of the conflict that allows Russia to be able to assume a role in the European security order that it deems to be commensurate with its status. And that's something that Europe in particular is just not interested in talking about right now as a matter of principle, and also because Europe feels quite insecure right now, not only because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also because of the fact that the Trump administration has put the future of the transatlantic alliance, very much into question. So all of this makes for a very, very difficult situation to get all the stars to align at the same time. And right now, given that the parties have not arrived at a stalemate, it makes perfect sense that Moscow is going to try to push to get as much as it possibly can here. And we can only hope that this does not encourage the West to escalate, even further in a tit-for-tat fashion that ultimately leaves us all extremely less secure. Of course, the worst-case outcome could be a tit-for-tat escalation that leads to a nuclear exchange. We seem to be further away from that today than we were in the autumn of 2022. But let's not lose sight of the fact that Russia does have core interests here. So does Ukraine, and so does Europe. And so when the stakes are very high, it does lead, sometimes for various actors to take actions that they believe can be rational, but ultimately lead to a very, very destructive outcome.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Molly.